So as I'm sure you're all aware, the CW's version of The Flash has an extremely complicated timeline thanks to the numerous speedsters in the show constantly meddling with the time stream. I mean, duplicates of the Scarlet Speedster tried screwing around with time to break out of a technically self-imposed time loop, his speedy daughter carried on the timeline fucking tradition by running back in time and helping Barry punch a big-ass satellite, and one of the Flash's future fanboys ran back and killed off some dude, kickstarting the show's entire timeline. Seriously, who even knows what kind of timeline fuckery these writers are gonna pull out next? Probably the best example of the crazy timeline, though, is the Crisis event that leads to the disappearance of the Flash in 2024, something that Season 5 recently revealed that Barry hasn't returned from even after a couple decades. Now that would definitely be a big plot point to explore, something that could grab a ton of attention and lead to a bunch of speculation, but I personally am not entirely sure why the CW is trying to make it a big deal right now. Reason being is, back in Season 3, we actually got to hear a message from a clearly much older version of Barry, warning Rip Hunter about Savitar in the year 2056, a full 7 years after Iris publishes her article about how Barry still hasn't reappeared in Central City after the Crisis 25 years before. So wait a minute, if Barry's apparently gone forever after the Crisis, as this current season would have you believe, then how'd he send a message to Rip 7 years later? We can't explain the Rip message away by saying it's from a pre-Flashpoint timeline, since the older Barry references making a big change to the timeline, aka Flashpoint, and Team Flash specifically mentioned it being about Savitar's identity in Season 3.
So when the Legends found that message in the Wave Rider from old you saying don't trust Barry Allen, he was talking about Savitar Barry Allen. And oh, it's all coming together in the worst way.
Sure, you could argue that the message is from the original Savitar loop, where Cisco loses his powers, Caitlin becomes Killer Frost permanently, Wally gets his back broken, and Iris dies, all before Barry finally beats the fuck out of himself, meaning it doesn't apply to any timelines post-Savitar, but even then, we know certain big events are fixed points in time and therefore always have to occur, no matter what's been changed in the past.
If Dawn dies before he can time travel again, will that save Barry's mother?
No, it's not how it works. In our timeline, Barry's mother's already dead and her death is a fixed point and nothing can change that.
That's why the newspaper mentioning the Crisis pretty much always stayed consistent, no matter what time travel shenanigans Team Flash got themselves into. With a few exceptions anyway. So regardless of whether or not Barry sends a message about Savitar to Rip Hunter, the fact is that Barry still apparently comes back a few years after he supposedly goes missing forever during the Arrowverse crisis. So what the hell? Well, we actually do have a pretty solid answer from a few different comics over the years. Now, most people seem to remember this moment from 1988's Secret Origins Annual number 2, where we see Barry, during his final moments in the Crisis on Infinite Earths, running so fast that he actually goes back in time and becomes the lightning bolt that originally gave him his powers. Obviously, seeing something like this would imply that the dude's gone forever, and that being the Flash pretty much traps you in an endless loop of getting powers, fighting crime, and disintegrating yourself, but we are talking about comics here, and since Barry's name isn't Ben Parker, it was inevitable that he'd eventually come back to life, as we later saw when Barry came running out of the Speed Force in 2008's Final Crisis number 2.
See, that's the thing about time travel, Barry. The more you do it, the less the rules apply to you.
So wait, hold on a second. How can the Flash run so fast that he can turn into pure energy, start up this big Flash loop, and still make his way back to Earth? True, he did apparently turn himself into a lightning bolt, but what you might not remember is that later comics state that this isn't technically true, or at least this isn't the full story. As we later find out, Barry actually merged with the Speed Force when he died, allowing him to make appearances in later DC stories, like in the Terminal Velocity storyline, which implied that whole merging with the Speed Force thing, or the time in Flash Annual number 11 when Johnny Quick mentioned that he actually talked to Barry while he was in the Speed Force, and in Flash number 150 we got to see a couple different speedsters, including Barry, as a part of the Speed Force. So, okay, he's in the Speed Force. So how does he end up getting back out? Well, it wasn't until the events of Flash Rebirth when we find out that Eobard Thawne actually helped bring Barry back as part of his usual I'm gonna fuck around with Barry's life type of plan. By sending a pulse into the Speed Force during Barry's appearance in Infinite Crisis, Eobard helped Barry sort of pull himself together, allowing him to finally leave the Speed Force during Final Crisis. So simply put, the lightning bolt that gave Barry his super speed is still technically him from the future, but it's just coming from his energy while he's in the Speed Force. Or at least it was till the end of Flash Rebirth, and then the lightning bolt got re-retconned as being part of a big fight between Barry, Wally, and the Reverse Flash while they were running past a whole bunch of different Flash moments in history. Now, I know this is just the explanation we got in the comics, there's no guarantee we'll be seeing Barry turn into lightning on the show, but considering how the Flash peppered in all these different references over the last few seasons, like the future newspaper mentioning Barry's disappearance, the Psycho Pirate, and the Red Skies, and how we've seen speedsters on the show entering and exiting the Speed Force multiple times, it just makes sense to think that we'll eventually see the Arrowverse version of Barry Allen giving himself powers in the past and returning at some point, somehow, to keep saving the day in the present. So long story short, this is the timeline we're working with. In the OG timeline, Barry becomes the Flash in the year 2020, eventually becomes enemies with Eobard Thawne, and disappears after a fight with the Reverse Flash during a major crisis. Presumably this disappearance is the lead in to the fight at the Allen House we've seen a billion times now, which itself leads to the show's original timeline where Barry becomes the Flash in 2014. After some timeline changes here and there, we eventually make our way back to the crisis of 2024, and that's pretty much it for Barry. At least for 32 years, at which point he reappears in Central City, or has already reappeared by this time, somehow or another. Maybe it'll be because of Eobard, or maybe Team Flash decides to chuck another one of those red ball things into the Speed Force to fish Barry back out. Who knows? I guess we'll find out whenever the Arrowverse writers decide they want to try tackling the rebirth of the Flash. But anyways guys, that's my take on how Barry might eventually escape his crisis fate in the Arrowverse. If you guys agreed with anything I said in this video, or if you have your own theories you want to throw out there, then go ahead and let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I will see you all next time. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, then go ahead and click that like button, and if you're new, maybe consider clicking that subscribe button too. I've also got links to my Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, and Patreon in the description. You should probably check those out too. And if you want to see more of my content, then you can click the link to my last video. It's right there in the middle of your screen. Alright, and I will see you all next time.